Do you always cook them like that?
As you bring the water up to a boil, they will automatically fall into a coma, basically. And then they'll die peacefully.
Is this all there is? Is this all there is? But the memory fades like a cigarette burning. So I go back to bed. Now the headlights are turning. Is this all there is?
To descobrir, diguem-ne, com va sorgir la seva vocació pel cinema.
So Caprice was obviously later, once I was at film school, but I was a photographer before I was making films, and my first job was working for a stills photographer in London, in Soho, and I already had an interest or a passion for cinema, but never conceived that I would be making it myself, because I was very shy, and I just couldn't imagine being the team leader of a film crew. And then gradually, while I was taking photographs, and the photographer I was working with was working on large format, 10 by 8 and 5 by 4, and he was very generous, and he let me use his studio at weekends. Also, unfortunately for him, he wasn't very busy, so his studio was often free for me to experiment with. And in those experiments, I started to think about character and story, and then there were certain photographers at the time that I was interested in who were doing photo stories. And then it was also the time in London, this was around 1980, 81, that Derek Jarman was very active, and he was living and working in Soho, where I was working for the photographer. This is a very long-winded answer. But I already loved his films, and again, I hadn't thought of myself as a filmmaker, but I went to see him, and he encouraged me to show him my work, which was all stills photography and drawings. But I'd actually had a commission to make a film for an artist, but I had no idea how to start. Anyway, he helped me, he gave me the confidence to make the short film myself.
I mira, just ara que parla de Derek Jarman, no sé fins a quin punt ell va ser la persona que la va introduir a Tilda Swinton, Matilda Swinton, que a més és la protagonista ja del seu curt Caprice.
Well, funnily enough, it was the other way around, because Tilda and I were at school together when we were 10 years old. So we knew each other from a very young age. And in fact, I met Derek in London in around 79, 80, and she was yet to make Caravaggio with him, I think in 83 or 84. And so at that point, Tilda and I were obviously spending a lot of time together, but we had no idea, or she had no idea, that she would then be working with Derek for so long and that it would be such an important collaboration for her.
Vostè, quan va acabar la carrera, de fet va començar a treballar sobretot a la televisió, fent sèries, dirigint sèries, també dirigint alguns videoclips durant molts anys, i m'agradaria saber si aquesta experiència amb un tipus de pel·lícules que no tenen res a veure amb les seves, d'aquesta experiència en va treure algun tipus d'aprenentatge, si va aprendre alguna cosa dels seus anys a la televisió, que li servís per la seva carrera posterior.
Yes. Well, I went into television in a way because I thought I had more to learn. I'd come out of film school with very little confidence because my tutors hadn't enjoyed Caprice, they hadn't appreciated it, and thought that I had a long way to go to develop as a filmmaker. So I had the idea, actually it wasn't their idea, to go back to film school in a sense. And the film school I had in mind was television, where I would learn to work with actors and scripts and do things in a very conventional way. But it was a misguided idea, and I've tended now to portray that time in television as pretty much a waste of time, or as a diversion, I guess, not an enriching of my work, because I wasn't expressing myself personally at all in the television series I was doing. It's not like television now, which is maybe a little bit more interesting. I was doing episodes of long-running series, so there was nowhere to put myself in there, and I'm not sure I knew how to do that anyway. But eventually I got so frustrated with not expressing myself that led me to make Unrelated. But now, when I look back, I look back slightly more favorably on that time, maybe, because there were parts of it that I enjoyed. I enjoy working with a team of people. I learned a lot about working with crews and with actors, even if it was in a different way to the way I work now. But there was a sort of industrial process that I learned. So now, if I'm shooting and we've got a very tight schedule and say it's towards the end of the day and there's half an hour to pull off a scene, because of the experience working in television and having to work so fast, I can make that work.
I aquest període tan llarg entre que vostè acaba l'escola i roda la seva primera pel·lícula personal, Unrelated, està marcat per aquesta frustració, realment, diguem-ne, per què li va costar tant decidir-se a tirar endavant ja una pel·lícula personal. No sé si era aquesta frustració derivada de que el seu curt Caprice no agradés, com ens comentava, els professors, o si hi ha altres raons. No sé fins a quin punt el fet de ser dona també li va donar una certa inseguretat, en tant que potser encara no hi havia tants referents femenins. Una mica això, les raons de realment que li costés tant no rodar la seva primera pel·lícula personal.
Yes, yeah. Well, various things occur to me as you're asking me this question. One is, at film school, I was aware there were a few male student directors with an incredible amount of confidence who were, not sort of questioning what they were doing, had very ambitious ideas, and were able to sort of pull them off in a way. And maybe I did in my own way, but I definitely experienced a crisis of confidence when the response to Caprice was so negative at the film school. So this period in television was really this time where I could have been going and developing feature films. It was also a very healthy, good time in British cinema, where there was state money that you could get, and people were getting projects off the ground. So it wasn't that it was a really bad time for cinema. In fact, in some ways, I missed a very good moment. And I remember a friend of mine saying, before I made Unrelated, when I was still in television, saying that I sort of timed things badly, that I missed an opportunity to move forward. But I suppose it was just that in television I was being offered work, I was earning money, and that's very, obviously very important, and it fulfilled me on some level. And so the time that it took to make Unrelated was really the time that it took for me to work, doing series, being offered another job, doing it. The years went by. Yes.
Unrelated, de fet, ens descobreix també una directora com força madura, que la primera impressió és que, curiosament, tenia poc a veure amb cert cinema britànic, Per exemple, no, amb els referents. És un film que recorda inevitablement Eric Rohmer, el Raig Verd, el Rayon Verd, i m'agradaria saber fins a quin punt, diguem-ne, com va formar la seva cinefília. No? Si tots els referents en els quals pensem quan veiem les seves pel·lícules, això, Eric Rohmer, per exemple, Unrelated, però no sé, Michelangelo Antonioni, Chantal Akerman, i de més són cineastes que va descobrir a l'escola de cinema, els va veient al llarg d'aquests anys en què treballa a la televisió, diguem-ne, com forma una mica la seva cinefília i els seus referents.
Yeah. Well, certainly I was introduced to a lot of cinema when I was at film school. And we had a very good education in, as you say, Antonioni, but also Hitchcock. Bresson was talked about a lot, and at film school I was introduced to his book, Notes on the Cinematographer, on cinematography. So I had a good education in terms of cinema. And even when I was making the television work, I probably kidded myself in a way that I was being inspired by some of the filmmakers that I admired. But there were limits, obviously, to that. And I mean, what I tend to forget is that while I was making the television, I was also developing screenplays and developing ideas for film. So there was hardly a moment when I wasn't thinking of myself as a filmmaker or as a future filmmaker. So it wasn't just that my cinema stopped and then it began again at Unrelated. It was just that the sort of motor was on a, was sort of running very low on fuel. And more than the filmmakers that I admired, it was really about tuning into where I was. This was between television and Unrelated, and starting to build confidence in my own ideas. And in fact, it was my father who died very suddenly, shortly after I'd done one of the television pieces. And I hadn't been doing, well, I'd been doing some writing, but I'd been collaborating with other writers. But I wrote a poem, in a way, for my father at his funeral. And that creative act of writing something about him, reflecting on his life, although its subject matter-wise doesn't go into Unrelated, or maybe it does in a way, I don't know, but somehow the writing about my father led into the writing of Unrelated.
I, de fet, la pel·lícula està protagonitzada per un perfil de dona, mitjana edat, sense fills, i de més que no sembla que trobi el seu lloc al món, no? I que es mogui una mica per la perifèria, no? de les coses. No és una dona que no és ben bé jove, tampoc és del tot gran, no? I de més, fins a quin punt vostè s'identificava amb aquesta idea d'una figura que no acaba de trobar el seu lloc al món?
I mean, totally, yeah. I think the problem I find is that I just sort of, well, it's not that I reveal too much, but my work is so personal that it's very, for me anyway, it's very hard to separate where the ideas come from and then what the finished film is. So it's, and part of what I was saying about moving from talking about my father into the story of Unrelated, I suppose by forcing myself to look at my father's life then made me look at my own life and where I was. And of course I'd had years of this frustration being stored up with the television I was doing, so I was ready to sort of pour out everything into this story. But the writing of it, I remember the process of writing Unrelated wasn't easy, and there were many times where I felt like I couldn't possibly express what I wanted to express about a woman with no children, about just very personal things that I connected with. I would imagine, I mean, many writers experience this, where you imagine the sort of enemy criticizing what you're doing. And there were quite a few times where I thought I can't possibly go through this. But I think that's probably the normal life of a writer, if you're touching on your personal life in a way.
La pel·lícula Unrelated també es relaciona amb una tradició de la literatura i el cinema britànics, de M. Foster o les pel·lícules de James Ivory, al voltant d'anglesos, anglosaxons, que viatgen a Itàlia i que viatgen a Itàlia de vacances i sovint al llarg d'aquestes vacances viuen un despertar emocional o sentimental. Però la seva pel·lícula no s'acaba, diguem-ne, movent exactament per aquest camí, no hi ha com una última catarsi. No sé fins a quin punt li interessava això, com entroncar amb aquesta idea dels britànics que viatgen a Itàlia i sembla que a Itàlia trobaràs algun tipus de revelació emocional, però que aquí acaba reconduïda cap a un altre lloc.
Yeah. I definitely wanted to avoid what I saw as a cliche of people abroad and what happens to them on holiday. And I already had a very close relationship with Italy, so I didn't want to show a very typical, beautiful side of it. And this place where we filmed has a motorway running across really beautiful landscape, so it's already got a sort of interruption that's quite ugly in a way, but that I found very beautiful. So it was, and the thing about the story is that it felt very true in a way. It's not that exactly that holiday happened to me, but I felt some of those things, I felt some of those humiliations, I felt a sort of dislike for a certain type of English person. So all of that went in there, but I wasn't trying to, I think I resist a sort of neat storyline, or I don't even really like plot, so it's just about the character, about the characters. And with Unrelated, I talk about television being like a second film school. Making that film was a third film school, because I hadn't yet developed my own particular way of working, where I don't write a screenplay, I write a story, and then I develop the dialogue when I'm working with the actors or the non-actors, as the case may be. So with the second film, Archipelago, I decided to write more like a novella than a conventional screenplay, because I learned from making Unrelated that that's what served me best. I wasn't interested in carrying around a 100-page screenplay with me. In fact, I wasn't interested in looking at words at all. I was interested in what was in front of me. So I learned many things, and at the beginning of the shoot of Unrelated, I did have this 100-page screenplay, and I just realized that it was useless, for me, anyway.
I, de fet, Arquipélago, el seu segon llargmetratge, ja gairebé notem com un estil molt més clar del que pot ser el seu estil cinematogràfic, i aquesta idea de no treballar amb guions com ferris o fixes. I de fet és una pel·lícula que precisament ja demostra el seu interès per aproximar-se, per exemple, al paisatge d'una forma molt plàstica, i és un film, en el fons, en què també trobem un grup d'anglesos en unes vacances que no resulten especialment satisfactòries. És una pel·lícula que va tenir molt bona acollida a Gran Bretanya, i un tema molt interessant és que en el fons no deixa de ser una pel·lícula també de classe, hi ha una tradició de cinema de classe a Gran Bretanya, però una pel·lícula feta des de la consciència de classe del privilegi. No sé si era també quelcom que realment li interessava, filmar aquestes dinàmiques des de dins, filmar des de dins, el que seria les dinàmiques del privilegi, de les famílies benestants.
I was, but as I hear you describe that film, I find myself recoiling a bit from my own stories, because I think I'm in a very different headspace now. And I don't think I'm interested in class as an idea or as something to explore, but I'm interested in human behavior. And as I was growing up, I watched certain types of character or people interact. I suppose you grow up, you're used to some, well, I was always an observer, so I was observing people, and that story came to me at a particular point after making Unrelated, and I don't know what else to say about it, but I mean, I don't watch my films after I finish making them, so I sort of feel very far away from both those films. But I suppose I continue to be interested in people, but what I'm observing now is very different to that, and I'm not sure if I watched Archipelago now what I'd think. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it helps if there's a few years go by and then you look, but
Fa un parell d'anys, no, fa 4 anys apareixia a New Yorker un article en què s'analitzava com en el cinema l'arquitectura moderna, l'arquitectura racionalista, l'arquitectura d'avantguarda, s'associa sempre al dolent de la pel·lícula, als villanos. I és com, hi ha tot un clixé que el cinema, diguem això, l'arquitectura moderna és la llar, la guarida del dolent, del milionari pervers i de més. Quan vaig veure Exhibition, una de les coses que em va sobtar és que jo crec que era el primer cop que veia una pel·lícula que posava en el centre una casa d'arquitectura moderna entesa també com una llar. M'agradaria també que ens expliqués com va descobrir la casa d'Exhibition i si realment volia, entre cometes, reivindicar aquesta idea d'una arquitectura moderna també com a llar.
Yes, I was really interested in that, and I was aware with exactly what you said, particularly in Hollywood. Yes, this tradition of the modernist home or house being the house of the evil character. So I wanted to see. I saw this particular house as somewhere very, very warm and very welcoming, and I got to know the architect and his wife who built the house in 1960. I'm sort of in the 90s got to know the couple in the house, and in knowing them got to know their house and how much love went into creating it. And then when I was thinking of a story about two artists, that seemed to me somewhere that I wanted to set the film.
I, de fet, al llarg de la seva carrera, vostè estableix també una relació molt íntima amb les cases. Fins i tot en el seu últim curt hi ha com una reflexió al respecte. Com es plantegen en aquests casos els rodatges? Com es filma una casa? Perquè fins i tot Exhibition filma com la història gairebé d'amor dels personatges amb la casa. A vegades hi ha fins i tot quelcom físic de la relació d'ells amb la casa. M'interessa això. Com roda vostè els interiors de les cases perquè tinguin aquesta presència en els seus films?
Specifically with Exhibition. Well, I got to know the house like I might get to know a person, and then it was very important that Vivian Albertine, who plays the wife, and Liam Gillick, who plays the husband, got to know the house too, and that they were familiar with it. Particularly Viv, and she, because she was already a friend of mine, also knew the house and knew the same architects, so she had, well, and she lived at that time in a modernist house herself from a slightly later era, and so she already had a love of that kind of architecture, so she could feel completely at home there. And for me, a lot is about familiarity and filming in places that I know very deeply. And then the ideas come through my knowledge of the place and knowledge of the people.
Viv Albertine, la protagonista d'Exhibition, que és una figura clau en la música punk en femení, té unes memòries esplèndides traduïdes al castellà, Ropa, música, chicos, on també recupera en part també la seva experiència en el rodatge d'Exhibition. Llegeixo un moment del que comenta ella. Diu: Joanna no quiere que use nada de maquillaje y ahí está la cámara, apenas unos centímetros de mi cara y de mis muslos. Dios sabe qué lentes estará usando Ed Rutherford, el director de fotografía. No tengo ningún control sobre mi aspecto. El primer día de filmación soy plenamente consciente de mi edad. Son raras las películas en las que hay una cámara tan pegada al rostro de una mujer mayor. Vip Albertin comentava aquest aspecte concret que és precisament també el de generar una altra representació del físic de les dones o de la intimitat de les dones al cinema. És com van treballar amb ella. Jo comento una mica aquí, el tema de tenir la càmera a prop, no tenir maquillatge, com van treballar tot el que té a veure amb aquesta intimitat també a l'hora de filmar els cossos de les dones com no s'han filmat habitualment.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if Viv has forgiven me since this experience, but it was, I mean, she got very attached to the house and very into the role that she was playing, but she was not used to wearing no makeup and being observed in this way. Also because she's a filmmaker herself. And at this time, I don't know, not at exactly this particular time, but she was making work and developing stories or screenplays for film. And so she was very much, as well as obviously having been in the Slits, the punk band, but she was, making work a lot behind the camera. So I think losing control of what the camera was seeing was very, very challenging for her. And so we were good friends, so we would discuss a lot about this. And in a way, the tension or the feelings she was expressing about the challenges of doing this entered the film on some level. So it was a very, it was a very immersive experience for her. And she hadn't met Liam Gillick beforehand, and all the casting happened very last minute. And so there wasn't time for her and Liam to really get to know each other before the film, and which I had originally thought would be really important. And there just wasn't time because of I found both of them, even though I already knew Viv, very, very, very late on in the process. And I hadn't thought, because Viv was very much behind the camera herself, it never occurred to me to cast her in this role. And then I was talking to her on the phone. In fact, I was asking her advice about who to cast and on the telephone, and I put the phone down, and my husband said, well, why are you not thinking about Viv? And just immediately made so much sense.
En el llibre, ella també comenta que vostè li va projectar Jeanne Dielman com una pel·lícula de referència. I hi ha quelcom que m'interessa molt del seu cinema, que és com introdueix artistes, com actors, però també com a personatges, però d'una forma molt naturalitzada. I no sé fins a quin punt a Exhibition a vostè li interessava tenir un artista també personatge, és una performer, la protagonista, però retratar la seva vida des d'una quotidianitat similar a la de Jeanne Dielman pelant patates. Retratar l'artista des d'aquesta vida més rutinària i no des d'un vessant.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I suppose when you were saying that, I was thinking I'm very interested in documentary, and maybe at some point I will start making documentaries, but I see my stories as, not stories in a way, are sort of observations of someone's life. So I'm interested in those very quotidian details that I feel close to in my own life of, spending a lot of time washing up and, all the things we do in our lives. I am interested in these seemingly small moments that somehow take up a lot of our time.
Tenim temps? M'agradaria que ens parlés una mica com de souvenir i fins a quin punt és una pel·lícula que culmina el seu procés de buscar un cinema que acaba representant una idea de la intimitat femenina, com anés buscant en què més vostè es pot, diguem-ne, reflectir. Fins a quin punt això? Souvenir culmina com un procés de recerca del cinema com un lloc on reflectir aquesta intimitat femenina.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm struck by your way of describing the souvenir as the closing of a loop. And I think I'm in a particular place right now where I'm wondering what's next, what's the next loop, because the souvenir did complete something in a way, but maybe not entirely. So I'm sort of figuring out, not to bore you with all my anxieties and my questions, but I'm wondering, is that loop closed? Is there more there? I have a sense that there is, but at the same time, it was very clearly expressing a particular time in my life, an earlier point in my life, and it's impossible for me not to be sort of thinking about your question in relation to where I am right now and where I might go next. The souvenir was something that I'd been thinking of for many years. I wasn't sure if I would be able to express that particular story, but there is something very complete about it.
De fet, a Souvenir II, sembla una pel·lícula ja molt més desinhibida, com si s'hagués tret de sobre realment com un pes. És una pel·lícula, per exemple, molt desinhibida tant en qüestions de sexualitat com d'humor. No sé si necessitava també potser poder aproximar-se de forma més frontal a aquest tipus de qüestions. Hi ha, per exemple, de Souvenir II, hi ha una escena que m'agrada molt en què la protagonista té sexe mentre té la menstruació, que és teòricament quelcom mig tabú, però que vostè també introdueix de forma molt natural. I hi ha un humor que jo crec que és present, en certa manera, en bona part del seu cinema, però que no acaba com d'expressar-se. No sé si això va pensar una mica de Souvenir II, també com la pel·lícula, des d'aquest punt de desinhibició, de poder fer ja un altre tipus de cinema.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if it's another kind of cinema because it harks a bit back to Caprice, although that wasn't a very mature work, obviously. But in terms of my ambition and my love of a sort of, a bigger, bolder, funnier, more stylized, maybe, cinema, I think when I think of Unrelated, when I think back to that film, it's very restrained. So I feel less restrained now, but maybe slightly confused. And I was going to say, and then I discovered something recently, which I'm really enjoying, which is shooting myself. So I'm not quite sure where that's going to go. Wow. But having begun my working life as a photographer, I now have recently picked up a camera or a moving camera, and I'm really enjoying that new, side of my work.
No sé si hi ha preguntes... Em sembla que no veig res. Si hi ha preguntes en el públic, si algú vol fer posar alguna qüestió, comentari o així. Mira.
I thought perhaps you could connect to what you were saying, that you're in a new phase, and what you're thinking with the latest film we just saw. You said you were in a different gear, and maybe the short film we just saw.
Yes. Does it need to be translated?
Oh, perdón.
No,
básicamente que habla del corto y lo enlaza que acabamos de ver con lo que está diciendo, una nueva fase, una nueva mirada.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you. I have such difficulty watching my own work, so I was sitting there looking at that, thinking, well, is that Yeah, is that what you're all going to think, that that's where I am right now? And I'm not sure that it is. I mean, that was just like writing in a diary in a way. I mean, I had my film shown at the Pompidou, and the filmmakers whose work they show, they get you to ask a question to yourself, which is, where do I stand now? And where I stood in that moment was writing a film set in Los Angeles, but also dealing with the death of my mother. So I very directly described that moment, and then it was very simple. I didn't have a crew. I was just filming myself, edited myself, and worked with my sound designer, although the sound volume was very low, so I apologize for that. I'm not sure why it was so low. But but I suppose that thing of picking up a camera myself and editing myself, I enjoyed. But then since then, I've made another short film, which is a narrative, but it's an unusual one. And I also filmed that myself. And that was working with non-actors. I shot it in Italian, in fact, and it's, again, a short film. So I think I'm enjoying these shorter pieces that are allowing me to experiment with ideas. It's sort of less heavy, or it also takes less time than making a feature film. And then the LA film that I've now written, in fact, I wrote it for an actor, which I'd never done before, where I've written something for an actor, and they turned around and said no. So I'm trying to sort of not let that project die because this person is not doing, I'm going to find someone else because I'm still interested in doing that film, but then I'm also developing something else. And in fact, I'm doing what I think I'm really bad at, which is thinking about more than one project at a time, because I tend to get obsessed with one thing. When I was making the souvenirs, I couldn't even speak to anyone about anything other than those films. So it's sort of, I'm very obsessive, but I'm trying out for the first time to see if I can, be a little bit more, I was going to say productive, but yeah, do more things at one time.
Hello, my name is Massi. I'm an admirer of your work, and I'm very much glad that I meet you here in person. Coming from a travel and tourism background, I personally have traced a strong presence of the world of travel and displacement in your movies. Like in your first feature movie, very, very direct, even in the second one. And even in your short films, like the one that we just saw, and the other one, Miu Miu, still maybe very narrow one, but we see some travelers where they receive the bag in a way. So I would like that, if possible, you elaborate a little bit more on that and how the world of travel comes to your movies. Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't thought of them exactly in that way, although something that I'm writing at the moment is very about well, it's not set in one place, it's set in lots of different places, and maybe it's partly because I don't feel I belong in one place. I'm living part of the time in Italy at the moment, but I'm not sure I'm a sort of citizen of anywhere, and so my films maybe reflect this interest in different places, and I don't feel, I somehow feel the world is the world, and I don't see these separations, or of course we're all different living in different countries, but there's something there that I'm searching in a way, not like I'm searching for a home, but I'm just something itinerant about me. And just to add that place is so important to my films. So when I'm thinking of stories, I think of a place maybe that I've been to once, or that produces a story, maybe.
I was curious, in all of your films, I really feel the presence of the mother as an archetype in a personal way, but then also in the absence of motherhood as well. And I'm curious, it made me think about something Chantal Akerman said about all of her films come back to being about her mother, and just how that kind of plays out in your own work in a personal way, and then also more in like a macro scale and looking at motherhood.
Yeah. Well, I was really struck watching the short film earlier of a shot that I took in my mother's house, and you're looking down a corridor and there's an armchair, and it's where my mother sat for the last few years of her life, and I really felt, her absence in that moment, but I could also see her sitting there. So out of all these sort of images in that film, from my point of view, having made it, I was really struck by that. So, and I find that time passing, I mean, my mother now has been dead 4 years nearly, and it doesn't feel like that. And in some ways, I think it becomes more difficult, or I find her absence more difficult, and I've always had an incredibly close relationship with her. So I think probably true, different from Chantal Akerman, but my mother's very present in my life and in my work, I think.
Hi, well, thank you very much for being here, and it's really inspiring to listen to you. I was wondering how many people are in the of crew are in the shootings, of your shootings, if it's changing that. Because I don't know, I feel that looking, for example, Unrelated, I feel that there was a small crew, but maybe in the Souvenir, I don't know. And also ask you if these people it's working, like if you keep working with them in all these films, and if it's important for you to have a strong relation with them, and what happens if suddenly one of them cannot do a project. And this. Thank you.
I like to have a smaller crew as possible, and always in pre-production I keep saying, please, let's just keep the numbers of people down. And Unrelated, I think there were 20 of us, including the cast, and the cast was quite big. I mean, even that felt like too many people, I think. And then the Souvenir, because we were building sets, and I think inevitably it was 40 people or something. But lately, the crew making the film you just saw was 2, pretty much, which is ideal. And then the one that I've just done, that had many more people than I wanted, actually, because there was no need for so many people. Because I was doing it for a fashion brand, so there was a lot of people sort of on the periphery, but actually I was filming it with one camera assistant, and we had sound recordist who was also doing the sound design. And yes, I do work with this, I love working with the same people. And in fact, my collaborators, which includes my production designer, I don't own him, but Stéphane Collange has done all my films. And yeah, if he suddenly said that he couldn't do something with me, it would be quite devastating. And then Jovan, my sound designer, has also worked on all my films. And these collaborations are so important that when I'm not even sure what I'm going to film next, I'll have conversations with them that inspire ideas, because we're so used to working together. So they're really, they're beyond the sound designer and the production designer or the assistant director. They're actually people that I want to talk ideas with.
Més preguntes? Una última pregunta per aquí.
Thank you. Congratulations on the award. I was wondering if you can speak a bit more about the process of working without a script, because I heard you talk on the Souvenir that you worked out the dialogue and you told the actors now do it whilst doing something else, or I was wondering how you come up with the dialogue and if you shoot during the rehearsals or how you do the whole process. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, there's no script that has all the dialogue in it, so there'll be some bits of dialogue in there that are important for me to keep hold of. But then what really interests me and what happened when I was making Unrelated, that I became really interested in what the performers in front of me were able to do and say that seemed much more alive than what I'd written. And so now I devise a way of working where I create the sort of skeleton of what we're doing, or maybe it's more than that, it's the sort of soul of the work. And then I work with my actors or my non-actors, and I don't rehearse, or maybe there are rehearsals, but I'm always filming because I don't want to miss any moment. So we develop it together. But my editor, who again is one of my collaborators that I've done every film with, always says that at the end of the editing, when the film is finished, how the film is so much like my original story, but it's gone on such a journey, and I'm not precious in a way. If I see something more interesting in front of me, I'm going to encourage it. But somehow there's what I'd written becomes the film.
Una última pregunta. Per aquí. Aquí.
Hi. So just to keep elaborating a little bit on what you were explaining now, how does the writing the story process look like if the dialogue can come up from such a collaborative setting?
Yeah. Well, it looks like a short story, maybe, or a short novel. And in a novel, you have pieces of dialogue. But I illustrate my stories, so there are photographs, and there's a lot of internal dialogue, actually, probably more internal dialogue than dialogue to be spoken. And so I feel it's like a sort of reduction, like in cooking, you make a kind of reduced sauce. It's a reduction of the screenplay down to essentially what I need to take me through the shooting and to remind me what I'm doing, because I'm not interested in reading and looking constantly at a bit of paper as I'm working. I want to create something very alive, but the writing process is very intense. So it's not that it's quicker to do this story. It's only 30 pages maybe, but it takes me as long as if I was writing 200 pages, I think. And so there's a lot of research and a lot of thinking and ideas that go into this short document. And actually, I don't know how many of you were here. Well, I wasn't here, obviously, but Bruno Dumont, I think, writes in a similar way. I don't know whether I want to ask you this question because I'm really interested, but I think he doesn't write a conventional screenplay from what I can gather.
I will do the last question. I will do it in English, it will be better. I'm interested in knowing if you have some kind of suggestion for young students or young filmmakers after your own experience in film school and all the process and doing such a wonderful movie about the unhappy experience of film school. I don't know if you have some kind of suggestions.
Well, it's easy for me because I've just discovered it myself, this way of working where you need very few crew and you can write something or not even write it. You can just go and shoot it now on your phone. And I was working on my iPhone and the quality is really, really good. But I realize it's it's not really about the medium you're using, it's about the ideas and in exploring ideas. And now it's very, very easy to do this, but you still got to have the ideas. But at least you don't have to wait around to raise lots of money. And I find it, I see it as a form of sketching, and I really enjoy sketching literally with a pencil, and this immediacy of filming and looking at the world and recording something is, I find I get a great lot of pleasure out of it.
The movie with the iPhones is Miu Miu Woman's Tales, Storia di una borsetta.
Sí.
That's a wonderful fashion film. I hope that
Yeah.
everybody sees, because it's such a kind of sort of remake of Oazak Baltasar, Robert Bresson's Oazak Baltasar, but with a handbag,
With
no?
a
A little
handbag,
bit.
yeah. And because it came at the point where the actor refused my Los Angeles film, I poured everything into this handbag. So it became a very personal piece of work.
We don't have time, but it would be also very interesting to speak about how to shoot objects, how to give life to objects. And this movie is a really great example of how to bring objects to life, through cinema. So thank you very much, Joanna Hogg, for sharing all this with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.